In this video, what we're going to be doing is showing you how to pull data from a MySQL database. When I first got started with React, a lot of people think that with React and NextJS and these kind of like new front-end technologies that you have to use a no-SQL database or you have to use some sort of like just JSON database. And that's the furthest from the truth. Doesn't matter where you pull data. Data can come from anywhere. And I personally love the tried and true MySQL databases. It's available for free. It's an open source. So it's pretty amazing. And people are a little, nervous about SQL, but it's actually pretty easy. And most of the SQL you have to do is pretty simple. It won't be an in-depth on MySQL, but just an in-depth on how do you fetch data from a MySQL database. If you see on my screen, you see here, I just have just a basic product image. And what we're gonna do is make that dynamic. So I'm gonna show you how to fetch the data. I'm gonna show you how to also fetch it in a way using the router as well. And you're gonna be amazed at how simple. A lot of people assume that SQL databases are only for like PHP or like WordPress, but you can use these for all of the front-end technologies that we have today. If you like front-end development, NextJS, React, CSS, animations, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Whether you use a SQL database or no SQL database, the bottom line is the data that comes in has to be converted to JSON. And that is with a simple method that converts any data from any SQL database into JSON. It's a one-liner. Now you do need NextJS for this tutorial because we're using Node, or you can use, if you're using React and Express, that's fine as well, but we really need to use a Node backend to fetch the data and put it onto the page. I'm assuming you came to this tutorial because you know a little bit about MySQL, but I'm using PHP-MyAdmin. Again, another open source tool. Just I created a simple products database with product ID, product name, product description, product image. Pretty easy. And now I have a database stored with a bunch of boilerplate data. I took some of Nike's top shoes and just put them in. I have 3 shoes here with images that are stored in the folder. In order to use this, what you need to have installed is a MySql package from NPM. The most popular one is MySql2. So you can avoid the MySQL. There's a MySQL, but MySql2 seems to be the more popular one with some more additional functionality attached. So you'll just do npm install MySql2. As you see here, if I go to my package JSON, I personally have SAS installed and I have MySql2. I've installed Bluebird, but we're not using that. That's for promises that go along with MySQL fetches, but you don't need that for this tutorial. Now, the first thing that you're going to need is to have a database. So I have one called products, and I have a table called products in the database, and this is just PHP-MyAdmin. And here I have product ID, product name, product description, product image. These are just text, and this is all just a varchar fields properties. In Next.js, you already have an API that has a custom server that you can execute Node in. If you're using React, you'll need only pure vanilla React. You'd probably need Express or something like that. That's why I love Next.js. So they have a folder called API under Pages, and that's where you can just do plain old Node. So what we're gonna do here, I'm gonna create a new file called getData.js. So the first thing we need to do is import the MySql package, and you can use the promise, but you can just import that because I'm going to be using the structure that goes along with the promise. And now we're just going to do a plain old export default async function that is pretty much, you could see here right in the hello, you could just take that over. So now let's go directly there. So we go to API get data, we see here the name John Doe, right? So now we just have some plain old data. But the first thing we have to do when it comes to MySql2 promises, we have to create a database connection. And that's the case even with MongoDB or anything else. We have to create a connection. So we're gonna go here. I have some code pasted here that I have here. And this is pretty much all we're doing is creating this. You can get some of this code from the MySql README file. They have some basic information. Now, just so you know, if you go into the docs, I'm using the connection, but I'm using the promise wrappers. So that's really what I'm using in terms of syntax. Locally, I have the host, localhost. The database is products. You don't really need the port, but if it's needed, you have a port property. User, because I'm using MAMP Pro. So this is my local, I have MAMP running. That's not, you can, take a look at MAMP. Won't be a tutorial on MAMP, but it's just a way to run MySQL locally. But if you have a server on DigitalOcean or things like that, you'd be putting in the user name and the password to that. Now, when you do this locally, this is very important. There's a socket path to the MAMP to the MySQL that you need to add, and this is mine locally, otherwise it won't run. You won't need this if you're deploying on production or you have like a server on DigitalOcean or something like that. You don't need it, but for here we do need it. So let's see if we create the connection without any errors. So if I refresh, I don't have any errors, meaning my connection is working and I'm just putting this plain old thing. This is great. So now we're connecting to our database. And that's pretty much it when it comes to connecting to a MySQL database in Node. Now what we want to do is fetch the data from that table. What I'm going to do is have just a try catch, that's common practice. If there's an error, we'll just run this right here, res.status 500 error message, okay? Now, nothing going on. So here's where I want to start connecting to the database in my tribe. This won't be a tutorial on SQL, but it's pretty basic, and obviously you're here because you probably know a little bit of SQL, but if you don't, the connecting to do SQL is just like if you were to learn MongoDB. It's all similar syntax that you need to learn. So let me actually hide this right now, the error. So let's go and let's create a const query, right? We're just creating a variable, and we're gonna put our SQL code in here, which basically it goes select product ID, product name, product image from products, and that's pretty much it. Refresh, no errors. Now if you see here in my database, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm selecting product ID, product name, product description from the products table, and I want to grab all this data that's in here. So I have my query, and now what I want to do is, now you don't need the const values just now, but I'm going to create a empty. This is if we were to have some conditional things while we're pulling the data. We won't really have that in the beginning, but I'm just going to create an empty array to have that because that's important for this promise. So now we need to connect using that query. Not connect, we need to use that query to pull the data, because that's all that's needed in SQL. People get freaked out from SQL, but it's so easy. That's the one line to simply get data from the products table. So now what we're going to do is say const. Now this is from the documentation of the MySql2 package. So we're going to get results. It sends an array with results. It also sends fields, but you don't need those. And that's it. And then we're going to do await, and it goes, we need to use the connection, await db connection dot execute, and we need to put in here the query and values, which again, oops, I left out values, which we don't have any just yet. And now let's hit a refresh. Whoops, I'm in the wrong, I should be here. All right, oops, let's see here. Is there an error happening here? Syntax error, await, try. Let me just make sure I have everything here correct. It's saying that this is, oh, I don't have the async function. That's what it is. So this, you do need to put async here. That's what the issue was. And now if we refresh, don't know what it's going to be doing. Okay. So I just did some little adjustment. I noticed it had some errors here, but what I did was just move the status of the name up here, and I just hid the error message for now. Okay. So now we have, if you see here, that's what it takes to connect. We literally just got the result. We killed the connection, and just showing here that there's no errors, that we've successfully connected. Now, how do we actually send that data that got pulled, which is basically in results? Now, you don't need to do anything except right here, we're converting this to JSON, and we're gonna say results, and you know what, just so we don't get confused, let's change this to data, and we're sending here the results, and then we're gonna send this to right here. So look at that. We actually have some data. Again, you can see the JSON right here. I should get a plugin so you can see the JSON, but that's pretty much it. It's basically doing exactly what people would assume a no-SQL database would do. You're getting the JSON that you need, and you can send that just like to your front end like anything else. And look at that. It's actually pretty simple. Now let's continue to show you how do you actually put that on the page. So let's go here on index. Now this is static. Make sure you have imported useEffect and useState because those are important. I do have a tutorial on my channel showing how I use JSON to show you how do you pull data in general. It's going to be the same principles. I'm going to show you right after this how do you actually put that into a wrapper. How do you put this into a wrapper where you can just make it a little more easy so that your connection doesn't have to be in every single page. What we're going to do is just create a new function, so async function, inside of our useEffect, and we're going to say get page data. Now you could use NextJS has, get server side props, which I'm not using. I like to stick with some of the vanilla way, but I have a tutorial on how to do all that, which you could check. The const, we need to just find where we're, fetching the data, and basically we're fetching the data right from here, our local host, and that would be, if you have another, if this is on a remote server, it would be that. You could also use environment variables. But for this tutorial, this is all we need to do. Refresh here. I like to always refresh to make sure as I wrote my code, I don't have an error. So right now it's all successful and it's working okay. So now we know we have the endpoint. We don't need to post data because we're just fetching. So we could skip that. And then all we need to do is say const response equals await fetch the API URL endpoint. I'll go ahead and console log it. But actually, let's convert it to JSON. So what we want to do is const res. So what we're going to do is say await, and we're going to say response.json. Let's console log the res, and I'm going to refresh the page just in case. Let's show our console log, and let's refresh. Oh, we're not actually running the function. All right, so let's actually run the function inside of our use effects. Right here. So we're going to say get page data. Great, so now we have it. Now this is React 18, so you can see here's some double rendering, and this has caused quite a stir in the React community, so I won't be addressing that, but it's double rendered here on first mount. But you can see here results and then an array of objects of what's coming from the database, just like as if it was coming from MongoDB, same difference. And now let's put that on the page. So we have get page data. Just to get this in here, right? To put it here. Now we need a use state. So const, I'm gonna say call this whatever you want. I'm gonna create basically a state variable set. Now, because I know this is gonna be an array of objects, make sure your default use state is an empty array. Awaiting this response over here, we wanna say set data response to the JSON. Now what I want to do is I don't want to set it as the results. I want it to be results dot actually, let's see what happens if we do. We want it to be results dot products, right? Wait, let's check what we. Oh, it's results dot results actually, because I called it results. I actually want to change this to products. So let's change the JSON here, refresh this, right? See, just change this to products to be a little more clear. And now if we go here, we want to do, I'm basically changing this to not results, the res dot products. Now if we refresh, let's actually console log this. And again, so we're good. So we just have an array. So we're just console logging the array of objects. Now we have state with all of our products. Now we just map over our state results dot map product dot product name. Let me actually show you that this works. Let me hide this, right? And you can see here, look, we got all the data. We have all the, if you look here, you can see here, they're all similar names, but Nike Blazer, Nike SB Zoom, they're all just in one line mapping over, and I'm just using the arrow function. Now, obviously, that's not what we're gonna do because we need to kind of make this a little more pretty, but to show you that that's it, now you have the data on the page. But what we wanna do is map it, so we wanna return really this guy, right? So let's take this, and let's put it in here. And now there's an error here, but that's because we don't have a unique key because we're looping over this. So now we have this array. If you look here, we're actually looping over the three products, but because it's still static, you can see it's the same image. But now we're just gonna swap these with what comes from the database. So now we're just gonna take this and say product product name. Then we're gonna take this image and change this. I'm gonna use a template literal, and we're gonna say product image, but I actually need to keep. So if you see here, it's gonna go away because we need to get the root database, root of where these images live. Now, a lot of APIs are gonna have like probably AWS URLs to images that you're just gonna put directly in here. I've just put this locally. I have this on my local computer. So we're just gonna do images. And I believe this should be it, yeah. And that's it. You can see here, let me close this out, all the different images. Now these are squished, probably need to fix up some of the, actually I'll just fix that right now just so I don't like that. So let's go to styles, home.module, and I just have some basic CSS. Let's do object fit cover. That's gonna fix that. All right, let's close that out. And now we have the data. Now, one thing you saw, that's it. We have a list of products coming from a MySQL database. Now, one thing that you noticed here, if you inspect the element, there was an error, and this is very common in React. You need to add a key, a unique key to everything, and we have one. That's why make sure your data always has a unique ID in every array. That's really important. So we have it called product ID. We refresh this, and that error went away. And we could stop the console log, and now we have this JSON. This is great. Now, I want to show you two more things. One is how do we create this and use a dynamic route and pull data. So if someone wants a specific product, it pulls from the data and shows it on the page. But before I do that, I want to show you how do you convert this into a wrapper yourself so you don't need to keep having the connection everywhere. So let's actually come back to the router and let's do this first. What we actually need to do is we want to actually save this as a lib.js into our inside of our, so we're gonna say lib. This is where I want this to live. So it's already taken. I already have one. So we're gonna call it db. I'm just writing over what I have already. And now what we want to do is we want to create the wrapper. What's cool is that we already have most of the connections there. We just need to convert this in a way where we're pulling. So we can say export async function. And now what we want to do is name what we want to, like when people are connecting, we want to create the variable that they're going to connect to. So it's going to be function query. And then we're going to say, we're going to create an array query of the items that I want them to add. They need to add the query and they need to add the values that are going to go inside. Okay, and then basically everything else is pretty much the same. Const db connection, MySql.create connection. This is going to be the one connection. We're going to try. Now we don't need this query, right? Because that's what we want people to submit. So what we want to do is await db connection. We want to put in query values, const. We want to name this results. And then we just want to return for them the results. Now we don't want to do this. We just want to return the results. And in case of an error, what we can do is just say catch error, get rid of this, throw the error. So it's basically the same connection, just creating open variables for the people that are going to submit. Now what we have to do is let's go back into get page. Okay. And now let's save this as get page lib, because I'm going to be using the library function right here, just so I don't want to write over the other one. All right. So now we have the library function, and now let's actually do this in a way where we're actually connecting to our wrapper. We don't need the connection now because it's inside of our wrapper. So everything else could stay pretty much the same. Export default async function. You don't even need the import because we're doing that inside the wrapper. But what you want to do is import the query that we created inside that wrapper. And let's go into that. So it's from this and lib and then db. All right. So now we imported basically this function from this into our, Node.js page. We don't need the connection anymore. Now what we're going to do is just go ahead and try do our function. Now we're going to keep the query. We're going to keep the values results. So I'm just going to call this const results. Oh, actually I'll call it data. Const data equals await. Now, well, we're not going to need to use db connection. Basically, we're swapping this out with the function that we basically created, so we don't have to do the connection anymore. So we're going to do await, and we're going to do the query function, and it basically, this is going to stay the same. This is going to be, and we don't even need to destroy the database. That's happening in the wrapper. And then we're going to say, let's just make sure res.status. So again, query.json products data. Okay, let's see if this worked. And let's refresh. So I'm going to go back into my index, and instead of pulling from my get data, I'm going to pull from my get data lib, the one that's connecting with the lib, and let's refresh. And okay, so there's a problem. Let's see where we have our error. Okay. I was running into some problems, so I wanted to show you what, while I was doing tutorial, sometimes I get mixed up with the code syntax, but make sure that this is an object, and then you're saying query, and you're passing this. And now if you refresh, if you go straight to the get lib, you see that this is working. If I refresh, all the data comes through, and now you basically have the same thing, just a wrapped, thing where you don't have to constantly run the connection every single time. You're just going to use your function called query, and you're going to do that inside of right here, const data await query. So that's the way you do the wrapper. Let me show you one other thing before we continue, which is let's filter this. So let's say we only want the value of an ID we want to bring up manually. So what we did so far, we have the get data, which we did manual connection. Then we created a wrapper and we used that wrapper instead. So instead of us doing DB connection execute the query, what we did was we made a wrapper. And then we're just using the function we created called query, passing it through an object of, these SQL and then parameters. So now let's actually filter through this. So now let's say we only want this guy. Now, if you look here, the product ID is 1 for this. So let's say we only want 2 to show up. Now we could just do that manually. And we could say right here, so we'll say in SQL, it's just simply where product ID equals, and then you're gonna give it an empty parameter. And then we're gonna say 2, passing a array of the values. And if you add more question marks, that would just continue to move on, consecutively. So let's refresh this. And now we have the page with just the second product. We filter the data. Now, if you want to show some subset on this page only, you could do that, right? So, but most likely that's going to happen through routers and things like that. So let's actually do this same thing using the router. If someone types in the URL products/the ID, let's make sure it passes that. Now, you can check out on my channel, I have another full tutorial on how to use the router and all that, but we're going to do it quickly alongside the MySQL to show you how easy it is to do. So let's close the db.js. We don't need that. I'll continue along with the library, wrapper that we have instead of the first one that we made. We can close that out. Now let's go back to index. Okay, so to do this, we need to use dynamic routes. In Next.js, it's actually pretty simple. We'll leave this as is. What we're gonna do is save as, and what we're gonna do is inside of pages. So we're gonna do say products, and then we do a bracket, and then we name the parameter that we want to be passed through the URL and what we want to pull, which is the ID. So let's save this into id.js, and now I'm going to save this. Now let's go to local products/2, and let's save. Now let's see what errors we have. Oh, let's change this path because now we went in one more path. Now, this is not dynamic. If you see that this is based on the same query, which we manually are saying 2, because if you go here and you change this to 1, if you change this to 1, you'll see nothing changes, right? Now we want to be able to have this pull through and send it to the data and come back to us and give us the right thing. So if we go here, now we need to do a little bit of adding some other things. So one, we need to import the router. So we need to say import use router from next router. All right. Now we need to create a const at the top of the router. So const router equals use router. All right. So now we have the router through. Now we want to pull what was passed in the router. So const ID, that has to be the same name as what you named the file. And now we're going to say equals router.query. So that's what's coming through, basically our router. Let's refresh this, make sure we have no errors. Great. So now we have this ID manually, because if you see here, I think this should do this. Let's see if it does it. Yeah, so you can see here 2, and then if we say 1, it's changing, right? So that's what, so I'm gonna take that off just so we don't get confused. So we know we're pulling in this dynamic route. Now we wanna make sure that this runs sending through that route. But now we have to do a couple of things before we can start. One, we have to make sure that this doesn't start until it waits for the route. I have a full video about that. There's a lot of errors if you don't follow this, that you need to have these dependencies when you're waiting for the route. So what we're gonna do here is add some dependencies, which is going to be the router.query.id, which is the ID that we have. And then we're gonna wait for the router.isReady. These are really important to make sure that this doesn't start doing its thing until we make sure the router has come and we have the ID that we need. Now, because the first time we weren't posting data, we were only fetching. Now we want to add to our fetch some post, okay, some post data. So what we're going to do is underneath the API URL, I want to create a new const post data. This is the data we want to send to our API to say, hey, you know, we're looking for this. So we're going to say the method is going to be post. We want to say make sure the headers are JSON. So it's just common syntax, application JSON. Now we want to send over body post, and we need to do JSON.stringify. And now we can send a object of whatever. We could send multiple things, but what we want to send is the ID. So we want to send an object. You can send further. You can do more here, you know, more content, you know, whatever you want to send through to your API. But we're only sending this ID variable called ID. So that's what we want to send through. Now we have this object, no errors. We want to send that to our fetch. So now we need to add it to our fetch method along with the URL. We just want to send over that post data. So if we send that over, nothing has happened, no errors, that's great. Now we should be sending this over successfully, because if you go here, now we need to say in our node, you know, file, we need to say, hey, I'm not going to specify this here. I want to specify this in whatever came through. So let's change this to const ID equals, let's get the rec right from the top here, rec dot body is what we are posted over here, and we send over some JSON, and we want the ID. So now we have the rec.body.id into a parameter right here, into a variable, and now what we want to do is put that ID right here. Now I believe this is all. Let's just double check. So we did local this to 1, and now we have it. It's dynamic. It's pulling from the database whatever ID is sent through. So we'll say 3, and you can see this changing. And that's pretty much it. So, and that's how you pull in data right from a MySQL database. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Hit that like button and subscribe.